Um, Hi, everyone. Um, so yes, I did. Yeah, I'm old. That's it. I did a lot of things, but mostly I've been in the last 6 years. I've been in the attack in the last 20 years, but in the last 5 years, I've been focusing on test automation. So we're gonna focus on one thing, which is how to find elements and how it affects the flakiness of tests. But any questions that you got, either at the end of the meetup or after that, just ask me any question whatsoever, and I'll be happy to answer. So first of all, even before we get started, I just want to know that I'd like to know you. How many of you right now are test automation? Like you write tests for a living? You do. And how many of you are developers that you write web apps? I don't know, like front-end web. How many are back-end developers? And how many are like manual testers? Like, okay, awesome. I saw people raising several hands. Okay, so first of all, I want to talk about the things that actually, the few trends that actually change before we even drill down into what's going on inside of and how Selenium works, etc. So first of all, things change over the last few years. How many of you are familiar with things like Dockers? So yeah, great. So Docker is a great thing, and even the smallest thing as getting a browser up and running instead of minutes to seconds, it really changes the way you test. Like imagine you have something and it takes you right now, and those of you with real devices know that if it takes you 5 minutes to get a device, then your test won't be 2 seconds long. Then you'll have very, very long tests. And obviously, if your test, it took you a few seconds, like half a second to get in and set up everything right, then you can have smaller tests. So one thing is that it's important to know that you should always check technology-wise and see how fast something, even to bootstrap something that takes. Because that can affect, you can write shorter tests. Shorter tests, if you have a long test and something fails, you don't know exactly what fails. Everyone, usually when I see test automation, I see like user stories, like really cool, like they take 30 minutes to take, or like even 5 minutes. So, and in unit test, well, you see the best practices over there, and it takes, you set up something, you do one action, that's it, you want to test that. You can do maybe very small few actions, but then you close it. So then when a test fails, you know exactly what's wrong with it. So that leads me to the second thing, which is if you have many different tests, if you have 1,000 tests, not just 2 tests or 5 tests, which are very long, if you have 1,000 tests, taking out the flaky one, that's actually easy because you know, okay, that's when there's one operation that happens right now and it's flaky, so let's get it out the door. And let's not put it back in until we know that it's stable. You can try, do people here do reruns, like run it again and again until it passes? So obviously, this is one thing that you can do, but best thing is, of course, let's get it out and have someone take a look at that and try to understand why it's flaky. And only when it passes like 50 times straight, then even try to consider that, getting that back in. So those actually, without even looking at what's going on inside, those like a very 3 like thumb rules that you can follow like that to understand what's flaky. But I want to talk about like drill down inside and see what other things are causing flakiness. And one of them is the locators inside. So we're going to talk, every test starts with you set up something, and we mentioned that. And there's, of course, there's the actions, and then, of course, there's assertions. So the assertions, we might get to that as well, but when you look at an action, first of all, you have to find an element. And there's a lot of things that can go wrong actually just finding an element without clicking on it. So you see, by the way, you see in different APIs and different frameworks, some of them has they literally differentiated through. So you first find an element, then you click on it. And something can go wrong in the middle, and you'll see different framework actually, just as you click, and you give them some locator, actually an XPath or CSS selector, actually how to find it, and then click on it, making it atomic. And this improves a lot the stability sometimes, because could be a mismatch when you find an element and a second later it's gone, and we'll talk about that. But so what are we going to talk now? I'm going to talk about very fast query languages, because I've seen that some people here are already developers and they know their CSS and XPath, and some don't. So we'll try to go very fast to talk about those query languages, and then we'll see how can we choose what are the best properties to actually choose an element. And then we'll see why, and I'm going to mention why record playbacks, well, the things that we want to do never work. And maybe we'll see how we can. So, query languages. Everyone here knows XPath? What about CSS locators? Okay, so let's see the small differences. So everything, it doesn't matter if it's desktop, native desktop, web, native mobile, everything turns out into actually a tree shape. Like there's an element, there's inside of it, there's more elements, etc. Right? So I'm showing this with HTML, but there's an equivalent in the other like native stuff. So in web, it's called tags. So it's very simple. There's you can say I want to use every layer has its own tag, and you can say I want to choose something using the name of that tag. So it's very simple. You just name it, and you just find it. The second thing is, and this is similar as CSS and XPath. Second thing is that you can set by property, right? Because HTML is it's very close to XML. It's called SGML based. If there's one tag, but there's a lot of properties. Like here we see there's a class called gallery, etc. And there's different titles and different class. That class can have two values. So there's a way to actually find an element by checking, show me all those that has specific property. And you can just check inside of it and they fine tune it. Well, of course, they added the shortcuts, so we won't have to do it again and again. They said, well, we use ID and class a lot for styling, so let's make a different shortcut for that. So we can find all the elements that has an IAM in class. So I'm going to find those two elements. We can search, we can add something inside something, so we can look at the IAM, but only the ones that are actually inside a gallery. So just by using space, very nice. And we'll see why it matters in a second. I can use the logical AND. So I want to get an element that both has a tag called IMG and a property named gallery, a class named gallery, and also a title which is equal to 1. So that's easy to find. This is another way to be more fine-tuned. And actually, this is something about the way that CSS selectors, there's a small difference between CSS selector and XPath. XPath can look at the parent. So I want to take the image, I want to find an image that has some element that has something inside of it. So I don't want to find the XXX. I want to find the parent of XXX. So this is something that you don't have in CSS until CSS4. But you did have that in XPath. Query using text, that's something that XPath used to do, knows to do pretty well. Well, CSS selectors, well, everyone knows it. That's why it's so awesome. And it's a bit faster, but nobody really cares. So let's talk about choosing properties. So which one, what's your best property? Who chooses here usually goes for an ID? And who goes for over using class? And then what I want to show is that it's really hard to automatically know what's the best one. You really have to dig in. So I'm going to try to do a find the problem game. So let's just say when we wanted to create our own record playback tool. Like we'll point an element saying, okay, I want to point at that play button right here, and when I play that back, I want you to click that button again. So I just pointed you at something, and you say, okay, let's see if it has an ID. If it has an ID, let's use that. And then when we run the test again, the test would be find an element by an ID, get that ID, and click on that element. So I ran this, I did that like a few years ago, and it failed. So when I've noticed that, I just ran it again. I just said, oh, whoa, there's an ID here, and I just ran it again and it failed. So anyone has a reason why it failed? Why would something, I see an ID, it has an ID, and I run looking for that ID and it failed?
Dynamic ID.
Indeed, random generated IDs. That happens a lot, especially in a reusable component, right? Because if you have a component there's going to be a few of them, you can't give it IDs. And that's the hard part about if you use some test IDs that you want to add, because sometimes you don't know exactly how many items you get there. So when I tried, and then I tried again, and I said, okay, and I saw that something else, I tried using an ID, but nothing changed. The same ID was there, but something changed. Like the test failed. But I've noticed that that's the second part that regular playback tools usually don't work because, well, the code can change. How many of you write tests for components that you don't write yourself? Like, if it's a different project, then someone can change that. This is called SpecOriented Programming. So if you change that, but if someone changes that and doesn't let you know, then that's it. You don't have any, you can't do anything. So there's a few other examples of actually kind of like similar. So I had this case where I couldn't find the element. I was looking for, wait a second, I know the ID, I put it there, I wrote the code. I was working at a small company called Wix. Well, not now, she's not small, they IPO'd, but back then it was very, very small. And I tried to write that, I was looking for that ID and I couldn't find it. Apparently, there was a lot of things with actually finding the right iframe to work on. It's as hard as finding the elements. Iframe, everyone have cache killers, so how do you find the right iframe? And first you have to find the right frame before you click on something. So that's that's super annoying. And I found that actually I saw a case where I found an element I was looking back then was jQuery. I was looking for that element, and I got something else. I'm like, what's going on? How can I find something else? Well, apparently you can have the same ID twice, especially when you do reusable components. You have a gallery, and then you decide what is it. So you have only one instance of that gallery, so you add an ID. But then the product guy wants, oh, I want 2 galleries, and then you get the same ID twice. So the last thing that was the most weird things I ever saw was that it worked like 50% of the time. 50% of the time you found something, 50% you didn't find anything. So it took me a while to understand what happened. It was literally they had 2 bodies, the HTML. At least apparently the browsers don't enforce that, but you could have some frameworks back then literally gave you 2 bodies and in random different order. So when you search something, it actually takes you the first one, the first body, and uses that one. So sometimes it works, sometimes it didn't. Okay, so we said, okay, an ID it's a bad idea to actually have to use IDs. So let's use class, right? A class can be a reusable component. You can use class. Everyone needs to put some class to get that rounded, like the styling, to get that rounded corner, and to get that button style up. So class points, but sounds like a great idea. Well, the thing is, again, like aspect-oriented, then, well, they change the UI. It changes very, very frequently. So every time you change the class, your tests break. So if it's someone else, then of course it's going to break a lot. If you're the one in charge of both, then that's maybe better. And classes, the thing about classes is I've noticed that when you have reusable component like a list, then how do you know which one? And I see a lot of people using the nth child, and And you shouldn't use the nth child. This is one of the worst things that you can use, because tomorrow they're gonna add something else, and you're stuck. So on one hand, you remember that parent attribute that we mentioned. So actually, we wanna test. So we wanna find this little guy here. He doesn't have any special attributes, right? But he is in a list. And what's unique about that list could be that it has an element inside of it that has the text NYC. So that could be something unique. That's the unique part, not that it's the first. So it's actually because it actually has that text inside of it. So you literally have to go, I'm looking for an element, an image element, that inside a list that has someone inside of it that has some text. So try not to use nth child unless you must. And back then I started looking about different types, and text. Text sometimes can fail, especially when you move on and want to test different languages. Then you'll see that text breaks easily, right? And you change the text a lot. You do A/B testing. So I've checked a lot of things and they all broke. So who here knows or never heard of page objects? So page objects, it's a whole talk of itself. But so we're not gonna. We'll see at the end. We have time, then we'll talk more about page objects. But page objects, the nice thing about it is separating. It's mostly about separation of concerns. It means that if you are talking about a specific component or a specific page, write all the code that is required actually for that specific page. So this actually helps you with a few different things. One of them is that it helps you separate the business logic and implementation. So that means that you can write the test, actually the business logic, like the login. You can say the test needs to log in, create an account, and do something like the higher level, just the English commands. So that could work out. You can write the test even before the functionality is even implemented. That's called TDD. So the nice thing about separation between the implementation and the business logic is that you can talk about the business logic even well before you have the implementation. And the second thing is that when you have everything related to that page, let's just say the login, the account page, you know where to go when something changes. When something fails, you know exactly what's going on. So the important thing is always, it doesn't matter what framework you're using, keep your logic always in one place. So if there's an account, get everything that's related to the account under the account. Super important. And the thing about page object, when you have a component and you want to have everything related to that component in one place, so it raises the question, wait a second, so how do I find that element, that gallery? Let's just say we have a gallery which has a next, a previous, and show full screen, right? So that gallery, how do am I supposed to find it? Or is that my parent is the one actually in charge of the entire page? Because there are different page objects, they're supposed to find it. And the nice thing is about separating those different layers is that if the parent knows there's different galleries, right? It could be 2 galleries in one page. But after he finds the exact one, then you step into that specific element, that specific component for that gallery. And the first gallery and the second gallery, they're exactly the same. But the difference is just who found which one am I referring to. So usually when you have page objects, you want to pass in as a parameter, like how do you find that element? So there's 2 options. Are you people everyone here familiar with Selenium? Like Selenium has those web elements. It has a reference. You can reference an element like in the DOM, like live. Even though you're running the code here, and you can access your drive. Your code is right here, and your browser is right here. You can really link, actually reference from afar an element. And that's usually it looks like this. You have, you can pass in a web element, which actually a reference to that gallery. And the thing is that then you can do all the operation that clicks on that specific gallery. So the problem with that is what happens if that element does not exist anymore? What happens if you refresh that and you have a new element that looks exactly the same thing? Is anyone familiar with the stale element exception that Selenium has? So that exception happens when you have, you think you're pointing to a DOM element, but right now it's been switched. It's gone. Sometimes because you moved to a different page, but sometimes because you just refresh it, and if the front-end developer didn't write optimize his code, it could be a different element which looks exactly the same. So for a human, it looks exactly the same, but if you point at that element, their previous one, and now it's a different one, then you're gonna get that exception. So the difference is, let me go back here, if you get just a locator, like a CSS locator, that's not a reference to a real object. That's just a way to find that element inside that tree of elements, like inside the browser. So if you use the string, just a string, every time you have to look for it again. So maybe that's slower, but that's like 50 milliseconds to find. If you have any of these, that can take like 5 picoseconds. That's very, very fast. The browser has super optimization to actually find elements. So actually pointing specifically to that element right there, sometimes you get those stale element exceptions. And this can help you. You can do a retry again and again. So your two options are actually just working with the strings or actually working with those elements, but you have to create a retry mechanism for yourself. So if that element doesn't exist, let's try this again. Of course, there's a timeout, say you have 30 seconds and I'm out. If I don't see that element for 30 seconds. So we talked about the differences. So I'm not going to sure we're going to talk more about that. But so record playback, I showed you actually why record playback, why it doesn't work. Why people for the last 10 years showed that actually trying to prove that record playback didn't work. And there was a bunch of them. And actually, when I tried to prove when I worked at Wix, I tried to prove that record playback can work. This is when I started thinking about, maybe it can. So maybe there is a reason. There is a way to actually to make this work. The advantages of playback, record playback is that you can write a test in seconds instead of minutes, hours. It takes you just use your app, tick, 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 and you got a test. But it has a lot of things that doesn't work. One of the locators, they suck. So you spend 90% of your time fixing the test. So when I saw that you're moving the code, then you have about 20 to 30% of your time fixing those locators. And then when I started trying to understand why is it happening? Why is the Selenium test, even when I'm using code or not using code, why does it keep changing? And how can I prevent that? So I do want to show one thing. I want to show something that we started building and which actually tries to solve this. And you can use those techniques as well when you have those, when you try to write your own test. So let me show you a short demo. But wait a second, before I even show a demo, any questions so far about the locators, about anything about the problematic that I show about why? I guess you've seen this before, right? Who has flaky tests in their seen failures? So yeah, it makes sense. You see, everyone sees that. And so what we actually try to do is actually see how can you write so you'll have minimum changes to your code. When someone changes their ID, the test won't fail. You as a human, you know, oh, look at that. I know it's that one. But when you write code, it doesn't work that way. Because you have to, and the reason is because you have one CSS selector or one XPath. When you have one locator, one static locator, it means I assume the application won't change. And that's the way that all frameworks work for the last 20 years. Think about 10 years ago, when I was working at IBM, we released like every 6 months. That was an improvement because a few years back, they released like every year. And now, who here releases like every month, less than once a month? You see more. Is there someone here that releases every day? Yeah, 3 times a day, exactly. So it released there's a lot of changes, and the whole idea is like, when there's a lot of changes, how can I make the maintenance less hell? So I hated the record playback, but then I found that I need something to actually show me more data about the app. So I started started this project called Testim. It grew a lot over the last few years. What I'm going to show you now is like a small demo and how it works and why is it, how we use that information that I told you. So this is just an editor. I just clicked on create new test, and then it opens a browser. I'm going to show, don't worry, I'm going to show how to use code and how to record that. Like, how does record playback work? So record playback work, that means you just use your app, right? Let's just say you have an app. So I installed this Chrome extension. Now it knows everything. It knows which URL I'm going, which browser is that, etc. And you just use your app. That means you just do something like this, and that's it. I recorded the login. I just clicked the login, and literally I can see the steps that I've done. I click the login, then I set the login, etc. So this is the first time I can literally select all those steps. And I want to group them. Remember, in grouping them together into like something like page object is critical. So I'm going to call that account.login. And once I did that, I'm grouping everything together. That makes it a reusable component. So now I can use this in all my tests. Well, we're not done yet, because the important thing, of course, is I want to add some more. Let's filter some stuff. Let's select the destinations. Let's click on more stuff. So I've got here a few steps, but the interesting part is, of course, is clicking on it. How do I find this element, right? In case you don't believe me that it works, I'm gonna just gonna click the play so you believe that it works, and it can even show you with when you make the modification. But I want to show you what we're doing underneath the hood. That's the important part. Like doing those elements, like doing the clicks and mouse movement, upload, file upload, drag and drop. They're all based on one thing, which is how do you find locators? So let's drill down to one of them, like this select destination. How do you find, what is the best way to actually find it? So actually what I found is that the best way is literally looking at all the different properties, not one of them. So I'm going to just open that. So that element right here, the select destination, it doesn't have a single property, a class or an ID. It has lots of them. There's a class. There's text. I know there's even the nth child, and I know there's a button. It has the tag button. So there's a lot of information I can extract out of that button. So if you use all of them, so instead of taking 50 milliseconds, it's going to take you 100 milliseconds, but it's still super, super fast. If you're doing all those searches and using all the parent searches as well, then if you examine the entire UI, then you can actually have a statistical analysis, like very confident that this is the element that you got. So actually, if the text changes, you can still be very confident this is your element, because you have the different parameters, different attributes saying, okay, that's that one. And sometimes, of course, you have a conflict, say that it could be that another element has that text. So this statistical analysis will actually, because browsers are super, super fast now, you can actually try all the different ways and actually, and know in very, very high confidence that this is the element that you want. And it's really, really, really helpful. Obviously, you can change that and moderate. Like you say, I don't want to use that. I know better. But I've seldom saw that you need to do that, because it uses all that properties. So the nice thing is that when we saw that it takes you a few seconds to actually write the test. But of course, the next thing I would like to do is actually also. Okay. is write code, right? Sometimes you always need some special logic, and that only code can give you that. So let's add another like a custom action and write some code. So I'm going to write something like I want to set some random value in some text. I want to create a repeatable component that I get an element, and then I just write some random numbers there. So I'm going to say I want to use that statistical analysis tool to actually find an element. So let's start with this one. So I'm going to create a shared step. Let's call a reusable component. I call it set some random stuff. So this is the name actually, and now I can. The nice thing is that this element, I get this element as a dependency injection. That means you don't have to worry when you're using this framework. You don't have to worry about finding the element, because the machine learning, everything we didn't talk about yet, is going to find that element, and it's going to do everything for you. So with this, you just have to write element.value equals to, I don't know, let's get some random numbers by using the current date. So and actually that's it. And so now we have a reusable component that uses dependency injection to find that element. So I can actually use another one. I can add another instance, just like the login. I can reuse it again and again. But this time, instead of using, I'm going to choose another element to work on. Let's say the phone number. So now I have two different calls to the same reusable component, but it's going to find all the dependencies that it needs. So the first one is going to find the name element, and the second one is going to change and then use the located phone number. And the nice part is that those kind of things usually, if it makes it what promises to find that element, so that's going to work. So you get a reusable component very quickly, and that's the important stuff. And the last thing I want to talk about is that when we're talking about the locators, is the value. So why did any of those locators have different values? So we talked about this one. I think that was that one. I think it doesn't matter which element, but we talked about what are the different values here. So the thing is that if you look at the same app again and again, so it's exactly like what you do when you work on the same app, you get to know, okay, this is a flaky attribute because it changes a lot. Like if you have a random generated ID that keeps on changing, then you don't want to listen to that. It's like a friend saying that keeps going when he recommends movies and he keeps getting it wrong, so eventually you're going to stop listening to him and say, oh, come on, you suck. So it's kind of the same thing. If you have 100 or different ways of actually finding an element, and the ID keeps getting it wrong, and you say, I don't want to listen. So you'll get the score for him, you're going to get it lower. So, and you can see that like the nth child, like the last one, the nth child is a kind of like a selector that actually goes wrong a lot of times. So it gets a lower scoring. And the nice thing is that if you get something like we did, that actually every time, so the more you run it, those scores, you can see if it worked, if the test passed, then you can learn from that and see what changed or what not. So you can see whether that text, you can see that it's been stable for a very long time, and that's why it has a very, very high score. Obviously, the things that, of course, we added to add is like everything that you're expecting to have in coding, like loops and conditions, etc. And of course, running it from the CI. So I think the last thing I want to do is actually, let's see if that even works. Let's save this. Let's call it best test ever. So the reason I want to save it now, because it's in the cloud, and that's the nice thing, is that you can now we can run it in the cloud. So maybe I can take this test and I can run all my tests. Usually you have a setting so you can copy and that and run those tests. Wait a second. So what I want to do now is actually I copy pasted that, and I'm just gonna change the test. test name. Usually you don't want to run specific tests, you run a batch of them. There's a test list, like a test suite, but I just want to run this one. And the thing that I changed the command line is I also added that my sauce key. Don't worry, it's a temp one, so you don't have to copy that. Sauce was nice enough to give us a way to grid so we can run the test and we can show it how it runs in the cloud. So we added something. If you specify your key and your so you can in your user, so you can run it in the cloud. So actually, this is now starting the test that we just created, and it's going to run in the cloud. And my guess it's going to flow. It's going to fail, and we'll see. The nice thing about Sauce Lab, you can see, you can also see why what's going on, and we'll see that it fails. And it's going to say something like the validation failed, something like that. So it's going to run, and it's going to get a browser. We're going to run, you see, it's going to get a browser, and once we get a browser, we're going to run it on the remote grid. So, but we're going to let it run for a second. So the nice thing is that we can literally actually see it run probably. It's running right now. And oh my God, he's trying to click, and he's trying, and we want to see why. My guess is that it's going to fail, and we want to know what happened. Oh my God. Oh, it says I couldn't find an element. And it says this is what I expected, but let's see side by side. And you see when we ran it with different resolution, so we couldn't even, click on that element. So if we change that, you can test it and change the parameters and say, I want to scroll to that, or I actually don't want to, it doesn't have to be visible in order for me to click it. Then if we run it again, it's going to pass. By the way, until now, any questions? Okay, oh, great. So by the way, just to know, how many of you use test web? And how many of you test mobile? And native, like native desktop application? Anyone still testing that? Oh, I see one here. Like, but it's I've showed you one of the things I've shown here is actually so it's not just about web. Like everything, whether mobile or not, it has its differences. Native mobile as well has different resolutions, right? Different devices. So you have to start adding those scroll to elements, and you want to make sure it's visible before you click that. That scroll didn't work well. I know that we worked on it for a few years. It's going to be released real soon, but in the Appium community, that the scroll didn't work, but it's going to be released soon. So there's a lot of things that like everyone's using underneath the hood, like those open source solution, which is great. We use that too. We do Selenium underneath the hood and Appium. But you have to give it time. There's a lot of things that we're working on and improving those solutions. But the thing that we try to do is actually to create frameworks above that. It's going to be easier for us to understand how to find those elements. Because Selenium is not going to change the API of how it's going to work. There's billions of tests that's counting on that. So the API will not change. But you can use things on top of that, and especially when you have those JavaScript execution, you actually find different on different locators. So that's what we did with Testim, and obviously you can do it. You can do some of the stuff yourself. So I want to go back. So first of all, I want to thank everyone. But I'm still going to be here at least in the next 30 minutes. So there's two things which are great. One, you can talk to each other. This is what these meetups are all about. To meet, talk to everyone, see how everyone solves the different challenges that they have. Everyone has the same challenges, and everyone's been treating them or trying different approaches to find them. I showed how I'm tackling that. This challenge. And I'm still going to be here in the next 30 minutes answering every question that you got, whether it's just locators related or not. So feel free to ask me. And the best thing is that like you're all here, so that's really great to talk to each other. And actually, I've started already doing that already, and get to see what's your challenges and how everything and how can everyone can help. So I want to thank you everyone again. I want to thank Sauce Labs for organizing this, and the pizzas are all gone. They were yummy. I ate most of them. And of course to Cloudflare actually for hosting us tonight. So thank you very much. If you want to try it out, you can go to Testim.io and try this out. And I'm here. Thank you.